Somebody save your soul, cause you've been sinning in the city. I know too many troubles, all these lovers got you losing control. You like a drug to me, a luxury, my sugar and gold. I want the good life every good night, you're a hot one to hold. Cause you don't even know, I can make your hands clap. Said I can make your hands clap. Somebody save your soul, cause you've been sinning in the city. I know too many troubles, all these lovers got you losing control. You like a drug to me, a luxury, my sugar and gold. I want your sex and your affection when they're holding you close. Cause you don't even know, I can make your hands clap. Said I can make your hands clap. Every night when the stars come out, am I the only living soul around? Need to believe you could hold me down, cause I'm in need of something good right now. We could be screaming till the sun comes out, and when we wake we'd be the only sound. Get on my knees and say your friend change round. But I can make your hands clap. But I can make your hands clap. But I can make your hands clap. My flesh is searching for your worst and best, don't ever deny. I'm like a stranger, give me danger, all you're wrong and you're right. Secrets on my way to the freeway, you're a keeper of crimes. Feel no conviction, grips of rock can only sweeten your wine. But you don't even know, I can make your hands clap. Said I can make your hands clap. Every night when the stars come out, am I the only living soul around? Need to believe you could hold me down, cause I'm in need of something good right now. We could be screaming till the sun comes out, and when we wake we'd be the only sound. Get on my knees and say your friend change round. But I can make your hands clap.
Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel! It's me, Angie, Arpars! Today we're going to have guests from the University of Southeastern Philippines! But before I call them, palakpakan naman dyan! And now, here they are, the German Shepherd people! First, Charissa! Second, Luisa! These people are so funny. And third is Riri! And fourth is Abby! And save the best for last for Karl! So before we start, these are the objectives of our discussion. Roll video. Understand and realize the German literature, specifically the literary piece Siddhartha by Herman Hesse.
Appreciate the story and the moral lesson of the literary piece Siddhartha.
Apply the moral lesson of the literary piece Siddhartha in life. Activating prior knowledge! Hey everyone! Welcome back to the German Shepherd Show! Before we start our discussion, we'll give you first our prior knowledge activity.
Yeah, and that is charade. Before we start the game, we should group ourselves into two groups. Each groups will have 5 representatives that will act the given words.
Germany is a country in Central and Western Europe, lying between the Baltic and the North Seas to the north and the Alps to the south. It borders Denmark to the north, Poland and the Czech Republic to the east, Austria and Switzerland to the south, France to the southwest, and Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands to the west. German culture has been influenced and shaped throughout Germany's rich history, once as an important part of the Holy Roman Empire and later on as one of the world's most stable economies. Time periods of German literature: Medieval German literature, the Baroque Enlightenment, Sturm und Drang, Classicism, Romanticism, Young Germany, Naturalism, Expressionism, and Dadaism. Medieval German literature. German literature begins in the Carolingian period, first in Latin and then in Old High German. Hildebrand's Lied, the most famous work in Old High German, is a short piece of Germanic alliterative heroic verse which is the sole survivor of what must have been a vast oral tradition. Medieval German literature. Other important works are the Evangeline book or Gospel Harmony of Ottfried von Wesenberg, the short but splendid Ludwigslied in the northern dialect of Old Saxon, a life of Christ in the style of a heroic epic known as the Hilliand. Medieval German literature. Some authors and works of the High Middle Ages include Herzog Ernst, Heinrich von Freiberg, Ulrich von Thurhem, Rudolf von Ems, Konrad von Wurzburg, Heinrich Frauenlob, Reinmar de Alte. Medieval German literature. The Old High German period is reckoned to run until about the mid-11th century, though the boundary to the early Middle High German is not clear-cut. The most impressive example of early Middle High German literature is the Annalied. The Baroque. The Baroque period was one of the most fertile times in German literature. Many writers reflected the horrible experiences of the 30 Years' War in poetry and prose. Grimmel's Hossen's Adventures of the Young and Naive Simplicissimus in the eponymous book became the most famous novel of the Baroque period. Some of the writers during this period who wrote about tragedies: Andreas Gryphius, Daniel Caspar von Lohenstein. Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment refers to the 18th century in European philosophy and is often thought as part of a larger period which includes the Age of Reason. These movement's leaders viewed themselves as a courageous elite body of intellectuals who were leading the world toward progress out of a long period of irrationality, superstition, and tyranny which began during a historical period they called the Dark Ages. It is matched by the High Baroque era in music and the Neoclassical period in the arts. Sturm und Drang, Storm and Stress, a German literary movement that developed during the latter half of the 18th century, most commonly characterized as having lasted from 1767 to 1785. The writers during this period: Goethe wrote German's first major drama, Gotts von Berlichingen, and German's most sensational and representative novel, Die Leiden des jungen Werthers, The Sorrows of Young Werther. Schiller wrote the play Die Räuber and other early plays which were preludes to Romanticism, Klopstock, and Friedrich Müller. Classicism. It refers generally to a high regard for classical antiquity as setting standards for tastes which the classical seeks to emulate. It is usually contrasted with Romanticism. The art of classicism typically seeks to be formal and restrained. Romanticism. It was an artistic and intellectual movement that originated in late 18th century Western Europe. It stressed strong emotion, imagination, freedom within or even from classical notions of form in art. It is also noted for its elevation of the achievements of what is perceived as heroic individuals and artists. Young Germany. A group of German writers which existed from about 1830 to 1850, a youth movement. The movement produced poets, thinkers, and journalists, of all whom reacted against of Romanticism. Naturalism, a movement in theater and film. In theater, it developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It refers to theater that tries to create a perfect illusion of reality, a non-poetic literary style that reflects the way real people speak. Expressionism. Expressionism is the tendency of an artist to distort reality for emotional effect. Expressionism is exhibited in many art forms, including painting, literature, film, architecture, and music. Dadaism, a post-World War I cultural movement in visual art as well as literature, theater, and graphic design. The movement was, among other things, a protest against the barbarism of the war and what the Dadaists believed was an oppressive intellectual rigidity in both art and everyday society. Its works were characterized by a deliberate irrationality and the rejection of the prevailing standards of arts. Literary works in Germany. One of the best examples of this period is the Diary of Anne Frank, or the Diary of a Young Girl.
Hermann Karl Hesse was a German-born poet, novelist, and painter. He was born on July 2, 1877, in the Black Forest town of Calw in Württemberg, German Empire. Hesse's mother, Marie Gondert, was born at such a mission in India in 1842. His father, Johann Hesse, the son of a doctor, was born in 1847 in the town of Paid, Wensenstein. Johann Hesse belonged to the German minority in the Russian-held Baltic region. Thus, his son, Hermann, was both a citizen of the German Empire and the Russian Empire. Hermann had 5 siblings, but 2 of them died in infancy. And in 1873, the Hesse family moved to Calw. Hermann is best known for his works, which includes Demian, Steppenwolf, Siddhartha, and the Glass Bead Game, each of which explores an individual's search for authenticity, self-knowledge, and spirituality. In 1946, he received the Nobel Prize in Literature. In his time, Hesse was a popular and influential author in the German-speaking world. Hesse's first great novel, Peter Kamenzind, received enthusiastically by young Germans desiring a different and more natural way of life in this time of great economic and technological progress in the country. Damian had a strong and enduring influence on the generation returning home from the First World War. The glass bead game, with its disciplined, intellectual world of Castlia and the powers of meditation and humanity, captivated Germans' longing for a new order surrounded by the chaos of a broken nation following the loss in the Second World War. Hesse's Siddhartha is one of the most popular Western novels set in India. An authorized translation of Siddhartha was published in the Malayalam language in 1990, the language that surrounded Hesse's grandfather, Hermann Gondert, for most of his life. A Hermann Hesse Society of India has also been formed. It aims to bring out authentic translations of Siddhartha in all Indian languages and has already prepared the Sanskrit, Malayalam, and Hindi translation of Siddhartha. One enduring monument to Hesse's lasting popularity in the United States is the Magic Theater in San Francisco, referring to the Magic Theater for men only. In Steppenwolf, a kind of spiritual and somewhat nightmarish cabaret attended by some of the characters, including Harry Haller. The Magic Theater was founded in 1967 to perform works by new playwrights. In the 1950s, Hesse's popularity began to wane, while literature critics and intellectuals turned their attention to other subjects. In 1955, the sales of Hesse's books by his publisher Schurkamp reached an all-time low. However, After Hesse's death in 1962, posthumously published writings include letters and previously unknown pieces of prose contributed to a new level of understanding and appreciation of his works. Hesse's works suddenly became bestsellers in the United States. The revival in popularity of Hesse's work has been credited to their association with some of the popular themes of the 1960s counterculture or hippie movement. In particular, the quest for enlightenment theme of Siddhartha, Journey to the East, and Narcissus and Goldmund resonated with those espousing counterculture ideals. The magic theater sequences in Steppenwolf were interpreted by some as drug-induced psychedelia, although there is no evidence that Hesse ever took psychedelic drugs or recommended their use. To a large part, the Hesse boom in the United States can be traced back to enthusiastic writings by influential counterculture figures, Colin Wilson and Timothy Leary from the United States. The Hesse Renaissance spread to other parts of the world and even back to Germany. More than 800,000 copies were sold in the German-speaking world from 1972 to 1973. In a space of just a few years, Hesse became the most widely read and translated European author of the 20th century.
The novel's protagonist is Siddhartha. Siddhartha sets out on the quest for enlightenment and tests the religious philosophies he discovers. Siddhartha's most defining characteristics is his desire for transcendent, spiritual understanding of himself and the world. He devotes himself wholeheartedly to the pursuit of this understanding, even when the path is difficult. Outside forces do not easily sway Siddhartha, and he follows his heart. A man dedicated to this personal quest for knowledge, Siddhartha will abandon a course if he feels it is flawed. Siddhartha has a son, who is also named Siddhartha. Siddhartha's best friend and sometimes his follower. This is Govinda. Like Siddhartha, Govinda devotes his life to the quest for understanding and enlightenment. He leaves his village with Siddhartha to join the Samanas, then leaves the Samanas to follow Gautama. He searches for enlightenment independently of Siddhartha but persists in looking for teachers who can show him the way. In the end, he is able to achieve enlightenment only because of Siddhartha's love for him. A courtesan who instructs Siddhartha is Kamala. Kamala also taught Siddhartha in the art of physical love. In addition to being Siddhartha's lover, Kamala helps him learn the ways of the city and leaves his ascetic life as Samana behind. Just before she dies from a snake bite, she also reveals that Siddhartha is the father of her son. The enlightened ferryman who guides Siddhartha is Vasudeva. He guides Siddhartha to a transcendent understanding of himself and the universe. Vasudeva is spiritually and socially flawless, and he ferries through seekers of wisdom to the enlightenment. He is closely linked to the river, and he helps Siddhartha learn how to listen to the river's secrets. Siddhartha achieves enlightenment only because of his association with Vasudeva. Hey guys! Welcome back to my channel. We will be having another activity to wake up your mind. This activity is called word puzzle. This is just simple guys because you're just going to get 1/4 sheet of paper and number it from 1 to 5. These are the words that you are going to arrange.
Gautama is an enlightened religious leader with many followers. Also known as the Buddha, Gautama is said to have attained nirvana. Siddhartha and Govinda seek him out, but while Govinda becomes a follower, Siddhartha ultimately rejects him. Siddhartha concludes that while Gautama has reached enlightenment, his teaching do not necessarily help others find enlightenment. Gautama teaches the Eightfold Path to his many followers as the way to achieve true enlightenment. Kamaswami is an older businessman who teaches Siddhartha the art of business. Kamaswami was referred by Kamala, and with Kamaswami's guidance, Siddhartha successfully enunciates himself into the society of city dwellers. Later, Siddhartha learned that the things Kamaswami teaches him about the material world lead only to unhappiness. Money and business are just a game for Siddhartha and do not lead to fulfillment. Siddhartha's son with Kamala possesses the final test Siddhartha must pass before enlightenment. When Kamala dies, young Siddhartha resists starting a new life with Siddhartha. He is a materialistic city dweller, dislikes his father, and wants to return to his familiar city life. Siddhartha loves his son, and he must overcome this potentially binding love in order to achieve enlightenment. Just as Siddhartha's own father had to let him go out on his own, Siddhartha must let his son discover the world for himself. A respected Brahmin in Siddhartha's boyhood community, Siddhartha's father familiarizes Siddhartha with many basic religious teachings, but is unable to provide Siddhartha with the answers he needs, which leads to Siddhartha's quest for enlightenment through the religious traditions. When the Samanas arrive to tempt Siddhartha away, Siddhartha's father intentionally resists, but eventually lets him go. A group of traveling Aztecs who believe that a life of deprivation and wandering is the path to self-actualization. The Samanas initially captivated Siddhartha and Govinda, but the two eventually forsake them to follow the teachings of Gautama. When Siddhartha eventually leaves Samanas, he appears to have attained a superior level of spirituality.
Siddhartha is a novel written by Herman Hesse that deals with the spiritual of self-discovery of the man named Siddhartha, and he based the book on the early life of Gautama Buddha. The word Siddhartha is made up of two words in Sanskrit language: Siddha, as achieved, Artha, as what was searched for, which together means he who has found meaning of existence, or he who has attained his goals. Herman Hesse wrote Siddhartha because he was inspired when he visited India before the start of World War I. The book was written in German language at Switzerland from year 1919 to 1921, and in year 1922 it was published. After 30 years, the book was published in US year 1951 and became influential during 1960s. The story of Siddhartha has three symbols. The river represents the life itself, time, and the path to enlightenment. It provides knowledge without words, and Siddhartha's reward for studying it as an intuitive understanding of its divine essence. The ferryman is a guide for both the river and the path of enlightenment. The ferryman is positioned between ordinary world of enlightenment and are open to guidance will find what they need within the ferryman. The smile, those who smile are those who have achieved enlightenment. These three symbols are objects, characters, figures, or colors that represents the abstract ideas or concepts of the book.
Everybody get 1/2 sheet of paper because it's activity time!
In 3, 2, 1. Pass the papers in front.
The Brahmin's Son. The novel is set 6 centuries before the birth of Christ in ancient India at the time of Gautama the Buddha, whose eightfold path guides the faithful toward nirvana. Siddhartha is a young Brahmin, handsome and learned, with the potential to be a prince among his caste members. Everyone knows he is destined for greatness because he has mastered all the rituals and wisdom of his religion at an early age. His village is idyllic, and Siddhartha seems to live in an enviable life. His father is a Brahmin, a religious leader and esteemed member of the community. Siddhartha seems well on his way to following his father's footsteps. Though Siddhartha spends his time studying the Hindu wisdom of his elders along with his best friend Govinda, he is dissatisfied. He suspects that his father and the other erudite Brahmins have learned perfectly everything from the holy books, but he does not believe they have achieved enlightenment. The rituals and mantras they have taught him seem more a matter of custom than a real path that could lead to true enlightenment. To become religious men by the standards of their own community, Siddhartha feels he and Govinda would have to become like sheep in a large herd, following predetermined rituals and patterns without ever questioning those methods or exploring methods beyond the ones they know. Siddhartha is deeply unhappy at this prospect. Though he loves his father and respects the people of his village, he cannot imagine himself existing in this way. Siddhartha has followed his father's example with conviction, but still he longs for something more. One evening after meditating, Siddhartha announces to Govinda that he will join a group of samanas, wandering mendicant priests, who have just passed through their city. The samanas are starved, half naked, and must beg for food, but only because they believe enlightenment can be reached through asceticism, a rejection of the body and physical desire. The samanas seem completely different from the religious elders in Siddhartha's own community, and since he has not found the wisdom he has been searching for, he decides he should follow the samanas' path and see what he can learn from them. When Siddhartha informs Govinda that he will join the Samanas, Govinda is frightened. He knows Siddhartha is taking his first step into the world and that Govinda himself must follow. Siddhartha, a dutiful son, asks his fathers for permission before living with the Samanas. His father is disappointed and says he does not want to hear the question a second time. But Siddhartha does not move. The father cannot sleep and gets up every hour to find Siddhartha standing with crossed arms in the darkness. In the morning, his father reluctantly gives permission. He knows Siddhartha will not change his mind. He asks that Siddhartha return home to teach his father the art of bliss if he finds it elsewhere, as he leaves to join the wandering samanas. Siddhartha is pleased and surprised to learn that Govinda has decided to join him in this new life outside the village. With the Samanas, Siddhartha and Govinda begin wandering with the Samanas. They quickly adopt the ways of their new teachers, dressing in rugs and taking only the barest sustenance necessary to preserve life. Soon, Siddhartha and Govinda adopt the starved and beaten appearance shared by the other Samanas. The philosophy behind the Samanas' way of life is the belief that true enlightenment comes when the self is destroyed or completely negated. They direct their ascetic practices towards the central goal. When Siddhartha has joined the Samanas, his only goal is to become empty of everything, including wishes, dreams, joy, and passion. Siddhartha reasons that after he has destroyed every impulse in his heart, his innermost being will surely awaken. Siddhartha embraces these new practices and teachings and quickly adjusts to the way of the Samanas because of the patience and discipline he had learned while studying Hinduism with his father. He soon learned how to be free of the traditional trappings of life, losing his desire for property, clothing, sexuality, and all sustenance except that he required to live. His goal is to find enlightenment by eliminating himself, and he is able to successfully renounce the pleasures of the world and the desires of the self. He becomes a protege of the eldest Samana, but the deepest secret remains hidden, and Siddhartha eventually realizes that destroying the will is not the answer. While both Siddhartha and Govinda enjoy substantial spiritual advancement during their time with the Samanas, Siddhartha doubts that this way of life will provide him with the ultimate spiritual nirvana he seeks. The path of self denial does not provide a permanent solution for him. He shares his misgivings with Govinda, arguing that the eldest of the Samana is 60 years old and still has not attained enlightenment, and that the Samanas have been no more successful than the Brahmins Siddhartha and Govinda left behind. Govinda disagrees and points out the considerable spiritual progress that they have both made. Though Govinda's counter arguments do not sway Siddhartha, they both remain with the Samanas. After Siddhartha and Govinda have been with the Samanas for 3 years, a rumor reaches them that an enlightened one, Gautama the Buddha, has appeared, someone who has overcome the suffering of the world and has brought his chain of karma or rebirth to an end. Some are skeptical of these reports, including the senior Samanas. But the news excites Siddhartha and Govinda. Govinda yearns to follow this new master, and Siddhartha agrees they should seek him out, although he has lost faith in teachers. Siddhartha uses Gautama as a means of finally extricating Govinda from the same way of the Samanas. The two friends resolve to find Gautama and follow him. The Samana elder is angry when Siddhartha announces their departure, but Siddhartha hypnotizes the Samana with his gaze, utterly silencing him. The old man silently backs away and blesses him. As Siddhartha and Govinda live together for Gautama's camp, Govinda observes that Siddhartha's mesmerizing gaze proves he has attained a spiritually higher than that of the highest Samana. Gautama. Siddhartha and Govinda journey to the camp of Gautama's followers, and the followers welcome them as spiritual pilgrims. Gautama makes a deep impression on Siddhartha and Govinda. He seems to radiate pure enlightenment. His teachings include Buddhism's Eightfold Path, the Fourfold Way, and other aspects of Buddhism, as well as many practices similar to those of the Samanas. Siddhartha and Govinda dedicate themselves to these teachings. Govinda quickly resolves to give himself over completely to the lifestyle Gautama prescribes. However, while Govinda is completely swayed by Gautama and decides to join his followers permanently, Siddhartha has doubts and finds he has trouble completely accepting some of Gautama's teachings. The next morning, when Siddhartha unexpectedly meets Gautama in the grove, he boldly speaks to him about his doctrine, praising his victory and finding the unbroken chain of being, of cause and effect. For Siddhartha, however, the unity is imperfect. The message cannot contain for Siddhartha or for others the secret of what Gautama himself has experienced. Siddhartha also points out a contradiction to Gautama. How can one embrace the unity of all things, as Gautama asks, if they are also told to overcome the physical world? Gautama responds that his goal is not to give a perfect mathematical understanding of the universe, but to achieve freedom from suffering. Siddhartha responds that while Gautama himself has achieved nirvana, he did it on his own, without a teacher. Siddhartha implicitly questions the efficacy of the approach prescribed by Gautama to his followers. Gautama admits that Siddhartha may technically have a point, but also notes that Siddhartha can put forward no spiritual guidance superior to his own. Gautama asks if, according to Siddhartha's reasoning, his legions of followers would not be better off pursuing a life of pleasure in the city. Siddhartha leaves his meeting with Gautama and convinced that Gautama's way of life is right for him. Sadly, he also leaves Govinda behind and begins a search for a way to find the meaning of life that is not dependent on religious instruction.
For a time, Siddhartha wanders aimlessly. He sees the physical world with fresh eyes, noticing the animals that frolic around him and the beautiful plants along his path. For the first time, he truly feels a part of the present and notices the world as it is, rather than ignoring it in favor of more spiritual, abstract contemplations. He spends the first night of his new life in a ferryman's hut and dreams of Govinda. In the dream, Govinda, imitating Christ, asks, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" Then Govinda changes into a woman, and Siddhartha suckles at her breast. The next day, Siddhartha asks the ferryman to take him across the river. The ferryman tells Siddhartha he has learned much from the river, and Siddhartha finds comfort in the ferryman's words. When they reach the other bank, Siddhartha regrets not being able to pay the ferryman, but the ferryman does not seem to mind. He prophesies that Siddhartha will return to the river in the future, and that Siddhartha will give him a gift at that time. At the edge of a village, a young woman appears and attempts to seduce Siddhartha. Though she tempts him, his inner voice tells him to resist. However, the next woman Siddhartha sees as he enters the city offers a temptation he can't resist. She is Kamala, a beautiful, elegant courtesan. As her sedan chair is carried past Siddhartha, she returns his smile. His first worldly goal is clear. After a bath in the river and a haircut and shave from a friendly barber, Siddhartha returns to Kamala. She is amused that the Samana should come out of the forest and asks to be taught the art of love. Even though she is willing to exchange a kiss for a poem, he will learn no more until he can return wearing fine clothes and bearing gifts. Despite her apparent amusement, she recommends Siddhartha to her friend Kamaswami, a wealthy businessman, but insists that Siddhartha becomes his equal, not his servant. Kamaswami agrees to receive Siddhartha in his home, but he is suspicious about what Siddhartha can do for him. Siddhartha follows Kamala's advice and does not beg for work, but instead acts in a manner that requires Kamaswami to treat him respectfully. Kamaswami quizzes Siddhartha about his desire to become a businessman, not expecting much. When Siddhartha answers honestly and shows that he can read and write, Kamaswami is impressed and offers to take Siddhartha as a protege. Siddhartha lives in Kamaswami's house and works with him as a merchant. Siddhartha handles the business with relative ease, but he does not emotionally attach himself to the result of his ventures, laughing off failure as easily as he laughs at his success. Disturbed by this flippant attitude, Kamaswami tries to motivate Siddhartha by giving him a small percentage of the gains from each transaction. Yet business remains only a game for Siddhartha, and nothing Kamaswami does can make him take business affairs more seriously. Kamaswami suggests that he try giving himself over to the pleasures wealth can bring. But still, Siddhartha does not change his perspective. His life as a samana showed him that many people live in a childish, animalistic way, suffering over things that have little real meaning, such as money, pleasure, and honor. Siddhartha rejects this sort of suffering. Kamala, on the other hand, opens Siddhartha to the world of love, which excites him far more than the merchant life Kamaswami offers. Siddhartha works hard with Kamaswami in order to afford the gifts and clothes necessary to court Kamala, but he feels he learns far more important lessons from her than from Kamaswami. He learns much about the physical act of love, but also about patience and self-respect. He notes that she understands him better than Govinda or Kamaswami, because she, unlike Kamaswami, can always retreat from the material world and be herself. Her life seems to have purpose and meaning, and this way seems similar to the life of Gautama himself. Though they share great intimacy and a feeling of connection, Siddhartha and Kamala are not in love. For Kamala, sex is a part of her work as a courtesan, and her instruction of Siddhartha is undertaken primarily for financial gain. Similarly, Siddhartha is interested in his relationship with Kamala only because it provides him deeper insights to the world of love that might better enable him to achieve enlightenment. Though Siddhartha is the best lover Kamala has ever had, Kamala and Siddhartha realized that people like themselves cannot truly love. In Kamaswami's employ, Siddhartha becomes wealthy and enjoys Kamala's intimate company. He lives his way for many years, becoming more and more successful at business. At first, while business is all a game, he feels superior to those who pursue worldly pleasures and riches. Gradually, however, he too falls under the spell of possessions. He looks and acts like a wealthy merchant, wearing the finest clothes, eating rich food, entertaining dancers, and gambling, but he finds the spiritual voice within him has died. Even his continued relationship with Kamala brings him little peace. Distraught over these dreams, Siddhartha retreats to a pleasure garden to meditate. He considers his life in the city. The life he has made by apprenticing himself to Kamaswami seems only a diversion from his path to enlightenment. His nights of drinking, dancing, and eating have yielded a pleasant oblivion but have produced nothing. His relationship with Kamala has given him pleasure and taught him much about love, but it cannot continue forever if he aims to achieve enlightenment. He realizes that he has been playing at the game of samsara, the cyclical path of normal life in which one lives, suffers, and dies. While it is important for him to have played this game, he does not need to keep playing it forever. He leaves the city in despair without informing anyone of his departure. When Kamala learns of this disappearance, she frees her songbird from its golden cage. From this day on, Kamala accepts no more lovers, and she discovers she is pregnant with Siddhartha's child. Siddhartha leaves the city and wanders back into the countryside, feeling miserable and contemplating suicide. He ponders the paths he has taken in search of enlightenment. With the samanas, he abstained from all physical indulgence, and in the city he satiated every physical desire, but neither of these approaches brought him closer to enlightenment. Siddhartha wanders aimlessly back to the river he had crossed with the ferryman. As he is about to let himself slip into the water and end his useless life, the sacred word Om reverberates with him, and his slumbering spirit awakens. His zealous attempts to attach himself to a religious movement or ways of being that appear to offer enlightenment have been in error. He has, in a sense, been trying too hard to find what he seeks. Siddhartha stares down into the river and begins to feel a strong affection for it. He resolves to not leave its side. Having resolved to live a new life by the river, Siddhartha soon meets the ferryman, the same one who had helped Siddhartha cross the river years before. The ferryman named Vasudeva remembers Siddhartha as the samana who had slept in his hut years ago, and he invites Siddhartha to share it once more. Siddhartha says that though he looks like a merchant, he wants to live with Vasudeva beside the river. When Siddhartha tells Vasudeva his story, Vasudeva knows the river has spoken to Siddhartha and grants his request to be his assistant. Siddhartha works, eats, and sleeps alongside Vasudeva, while Vasudeva instructs Siddhartha in the practical aspects of being a ferryman. During this period, Siddhartha gently plies Vasudeva about the connection between his seeming enlightened detachment and his life at the river. Vasudeva replies that the river has many secrets to tell and lessons to offer, and that he will help Siddhartha learn these secrets and lessons. The first lesson Siddhartha learns from the river is that time does not exist. When he asks Vasudeva if he has learned this secret as well, Vasudeva smiles broadly and says yes. Siddhartha is excited with the discovery and realizes that all suffering, self-torment, anxieties, difficulties, and hostilities are anchored in time, and all will disappear when people overcome the idea of time. Some time later, Vasudeva smiles even more broadly when Siddhartha notices that the river has many voices, that it sounds like all things and all people, and that when the voices are all heard in unison, the sound of appears. News that the Buddha is dying sweeps through the land, and pilgrims by the hundreds begin to flocking to pay him homage. Among them are Kamala and her son, an unwilling traveler who longs for the comfort of his home. A short distance from the river, she stops to rest, and a poisonous snake bites her. Vasudeva hears the son's cry for help, carries Kamala to the ferry, and brings her across the river to their hut. Siddhartha immediately recognizes her, and he thinks her son looks familiar. Then he realizes that the boy must be his son. Kamala lives long enough to speak to Siddhartha. In this last conversation, she knows she need not to see the Buddha to fulfill her wish of seeing an enlightened one. Siddhartha is no different from the Buddha. Siddhartha himself feels blessed, for now he has a son. After Kamala's funeral, Siddhartha does his best to console and provide for his son, but the boy is spoiled and cynical. Siddhartha's son dislikes life with the two ferrymen, wishing to return to the city and the life of what he knows. Siddhartha cannot convince him that fine clothes, a soft bed, and servants have little meaning. Siddhartha believes he should raise his son himself, and Vasudeva at first agrees, though he tries as hard as he can to make his son happy and to show him how to live a good life. Siddhartha finds his son filled with rage. His son steals from Vasudeva and Siddhartha and berates them, making their lives unpleasant. Siddhartha finds that, though he has never been able to love before, he now loves his son, and as a result, he dismisses his son's behavior as the inevitable result of Kamala's death. One night, the son yells that Siddhartha has neither the authority nor the will to discipline him. The son screams that a ferryman living by a river is the last thing he would ever want to become, that he would rather be a murderer than a man like Siddhartha. Siddhartha has no reply. The next morning, Siddhartha discovers that his son has run away, stealing all of Siddhartha's and Vasudeva's money. Vasudeva believes that Siddhartha should let the son go, but Siddhartha feels he must follow his son, if only out of concern for his safety. Siddhartha gives chase, but soon realizes his task is futile. He now knows his son will hide if he sees Siddhartha. Still, Siddhartha keeps going until he has reached the city. As he looks at the city, memories of his life there come rushing back. Remembers the time he spent with Kamaswami and especially with Kamala. In a flash, Siddhartha acknowledges he must let his son go. He understands that no amount of reasoning will convince him to stay. Although the son may grow into a spiritual pilgrim like Siddhartha, the quest must be taken on his own. Siddhartha falls to the ground, exhausted, and is awakened by Vasudeva, who has secretly followed him. Together, they return to the river. Govinda returns to the river to seek enlightenment. He has heard of a wise man living there, but when he arrives, he does not recognize Siddhartha. When Govinda asks him for advice, Siddhartha tells him with a smile that he is searching too hard and that he is possessed by his goal, and then calls him by name. Govinda is amazed now as when he failed to recognize Siddhartha at the river years earlier. Govinda still follows Gautama, but has not attained the kind of enlightenment that Siddhartha now radiates. So he asks Siddhartha to teach him what he knows. Govinda stays the night in Siddhartha's hut, and Siddhartha gives advice that is a summary of his wisdom. He warns Govinda, however, that his wisdom cannot be taught, and that no one can teach the wisdom because verbal explanations are limited and can never communicate the entirety of enlightenment. Knowledge can be passed along, but individuals must earn their own wisdom. Siddhartha points out that when one attempts to teach, as the Buddha did, one must divide or categorize the world into samsara and nirvana, into disappointment and truth, into sorrow and salvation. Siddhartha has learned that for every truth, there is an opposite truth. No one is ever fully saintly or fully sinful, and if someone appears to be so, it is merely a deception that time is real. The world is never incomplete or on its path to completeness. It is complete at every moment. Grace carries every sin, all babies carry death, and all the dying carry eternal life. Siddhartha says he wants only to love the world as it has been, as it is, and as it will be, and to consider all creatures with love, admiration, and reverence. Govinda asks Siddhartha if there is not some additional advice that might help him. Govinda points out that he is very old and has little time to reach the final understanding Siddhartha has attained. Siddhartha tells Govinda to kiss him on the forehead. When he does, Govinda sees the timeless flow of forces and images pass before his eyes, just as Siddhartha had envisioned them in the flowing river. With tears streaming from his eyes, Govinda bows down to Siddhartha, whose smiling face is no different from that of the enlightened Buddha. Govinda and Siddhartha have both finally achieved the enlightenment they set out to find in the days of their youth.
Major conflict. Siddhartha searches for total spiritual enlightenment. Rising action. Siddhartha experiments with different teachers and approaches to nirvana, and when they prove unsatisfactory, he turns his search inward.
The climax of the story Siddhartha is that when Siddhartha finally achieves total spiritual understanding as he sits beside Vasudeva and listens to the river. This is the climax of the story because this is the most anticipated part of Siddhartha's journey the whole duration of his search for enlightenment. He has tried and joined many pilgrims, but in the end, he was able to achieve enlightenment through the river with the help of Vasudeva. The denouement of the story, Siddhartha, is that Siddhartha meets Govinda and shares nirvana he has attained. This is the denouement because in the first part of the story, Siddhartha and Govinda both searched for enlightenment. However, they both parted ways. After Siddhartha have attained enlightenment, Govinda showed himself and asked if he can also have the enlightenment he have attained. Though both have not taken the same path, in the end, they have still achieved enlightenment.
The literary piece from the German literature that will be discussed is entitled Siddhartha,
A novel by Herman Hesse that was published in the year 1922.
So sit back and relax and let's join Siddhartha on his journey in seeking for enlightenment.
First, style. The literary piece, Siddhartha, is a narrative type of writing style. Narrative type of writing style is a type of writing wherein the writer narrates a story. The story of Siddhartha is narrative and there's an invisible narrator who narrates the story of Siddhartha in his quest for seeking true enlightenment. The narrative in the story is simple, but the ideas it expounds are profound.
Second, the form. A form is the organization, arrangement, or framework of a literary work. It's also the manner or style of constructing, arranging, and coordinating the parts of a composition for an effective result. One of the literary forms is a novel. A novel is a composition written in the form of a fictional prose narrative of considerable length and complexity in which the actions, speech, and thoughts of the characters serve to unfold the plot. The literary piece Siddhartha is a novel since the story depends on the actions or decisions of the characters, especially the main character of the story, Siddhartha, in a way that through the journey of Siddhartha, the plot unfolds on his seek for true enlightenment. Third, point of view. The point of view of the story is third-person omniscient. The third-person omniscient point of view is a method of storytelling in which the narrator knows the thoughts and feelings of all the characters in the story. Unlike the third person limited is the point of voice that adheres closely to one character's perspective, that is usually the main character of the story. Through the use of the third-person omniscient point of view, the writer is able to bring to life an entire world of characters and give them significant depth and meaning. In the literary piece Siddhartha, the author gives significant meanings not just on the main character who is Siddhartha, but also the other characters in the story, like Govinda, Kamala, the Samanas, Brahmins, and etc. Fourth, tone. Tone is the manner in which a writer approaches the theme and subject. The tone can be formal and informal, serious, comic, sarcastic, sad, or cheerful, or it may be any other existing attitude. The literary piece Siddhartha's tone is formal, serious, or solemnity of manner in the story. Fifth, the theme. The novel Siddhartha by Herman Hesse have three major themes. First, the search for spiritual enlightenment. In Siddhartha, an unrelenting search for truth is essential for achieving a harmonious relationship with the world. The truth for which Siddhartha and Govinda search is a universal understanding of life, or nirvana. Siddhartha and Govinda both have a fundamental desire to understand their lives through spirituality, seek to do this by reaching nirvana, and start with the conviction that finding nirvana is possible. But Siddhartha and Govinda differ in what they're willing to do in search for this truth. In Siddhartha's case, when he becomes suspicious that one path may lead to a dead end, he quickly alters his course. He is willing to abandon the path of the Brahmins for the path of the Samanas, to leave the Samanas for Gautama, and then to make a radical departure from spiritual teachers and search in the material world with Kamala and Kamaswami. He does not relent in his search and instead continues to follow whatever path becomes available if he has clearly not yet reached nirvana. While Govinda is much less flexible in his quest for spiritual enlightenment, Govinda restricts himself to the spiritual and religious world and persists in his need for teachers. He is willing to seek truth only as long as it appears within the narrow confines of Hinduism or Buddhism that is transmitted by a respected teacher. Therefore, Govinda is unable to see the truth around him. Since he limits his belief, the truth will appear in the way that been taught by his teachers. Second, inner versus exterior guidance. Siddhartha learns that enlightenment cannot be reached through teachers because it cannot be taught. Enlightenment comes from within. Siddhartha begins looking for enlightenment initially by looking for external guidance from organized religion in the form of Brahmins, Samanas, and Buddhists. When these external spiritual sources fail to bring him the knowledge and guidance he needs, he discards them for Kamala and Kamaswami in the material world, again using an external source in his quest. These sources also fail to teach him wisdom, and he knows he must not find wisdom on his own. This realization itself comes from within. Then he leaves, and his eventual attainment of nirvana does not come from someone imparting the wisdom to him, but instead through an internal connection to the river, which he finds contains the entire universe. Third, the wisdom of indirection. Throughout the novel, Siddhartha pursues nirvana differently, and though at first his tactics are aggressive and deliberate, he eventually finds that a more indirect approach yields greater rewards. Both Siddhartha and Govinda initially seek nirvana aggressively and directly. Govinda remains dedicated to the relentless practice of Buddhist devotions that are specifically intended to bring about enlightenment. But Siddhartha eventually rejects these methods and instead relies on intuition for guidance. Siddhartha points out that by focusing only on the goal of nirvana, Govinda failed to notice the tiny clues along the way that would have pointed him in the right direction. In effect, Govinda tries too hard. Siddhartha ultimately understands that because the essence of enlightenment already exists within us and is present in the world at every moment, prescriptive paths simply lead us further from ourselves and from the wisdom we seek. An indirect approach is more likely to take into account all the elements of the world and is therefore better able to provide the necessary distance from which to see the unity of the world. 6. Significant criticisms from other authors. First, Joseph Milek. He is a German critic and author. He has a book entitled Herman Hesse, Life and Art. According to Joseph Milek, Siddhartha is the perfect exemplification of what Milek calls conscious craftsmanship. For Milek, he consciously synchronized form and substance in Siddhartha to best illustrate a feeling of unity and the journey through the mind, body, and soul. In Siddhartha, he consciously crafted a piece that is unified in form, style, and content, and created an atmosphere in which each one of these elements is perfectly complementary with the others. Second, Hans Meyer. According to Meyer, his figures should not be interpreted as psychological exemptions, but as representative types who embody differing responses to society, by which Siddhartha and Govinda exemplify that idea, as they are foils of each other. Though they are presented as friends, the traits of Govinda possesses, like willingness to follow others, contrast sharply with Siddhartha. Siddhartha's chosen path stands out as more independent and unique because of this. Meyer also added that though Siddhartha is shown to be an individual, he in general serves to represent the type of person who sees it necessary to forge their own path and learn from the world around them, while Govinda represents the type of person who, in a society that strives for spiritual perfection, chooses to follow the teachings of someone who has successfully reached their goal, as opposed to gaining wisdom from their own life experience.